us using drum machines now. Drums and the machines, trying to make our drums humdrum. They're trying to move our magic. Instruments be political prisoners up inside computers. As if the heart were not enough. As if the heart were not enough. And as heartbeats bring percussions, fallen trees bring repercussions, cities play upon our souls like broken drums. We drum the essence of creation from city slums, but city slums mute our drums, and our drums become humdrum, cause city slums have never been where our drums are from. Just the place where our daughters and sons become offbeat heartbeats, slaves to city streets. When hearts get broken and heartbeats stop, broken heartbeats become breakbeats for niggas to rhyme on top, but I won't rhyme on top no track.
Today we're going to be looking at how power relations shape the construction of self. Well, let's do a little review of what we've been talking about the past couple of weeks. So far, we've argued that the self is performance. Goffman argued that we should think about the creation of the self like a theatrical play, where somebody is offering somebody and somebody else is the audience for that offering. And together, they collaboratively manufacture the self. I put something out there, you either accept it or reject it, or we negotiate that self, and the self is a creation of two people. It's interactive. We've looked at issues like space, we've looked at cyberspace, and how issues like anonymity and embodiment will shape the creation of self and have large implications for our society. We've looked at white girls and black girls as different reference groups, and how they engaged institutions like the mass media. I'd like to point out that when you look at that article by Milky, she was looking at the mass media, but we can look at other institutions. We can look at the family as an institution, we could look at the church as an institution, we could look at the workplace as an institution. The idea here is that institutions offer images and stories, and our reference groups mediate how those institutions shape ourselves. And we've also looked at the narratives of Codependence Anonymous. Now, again, don't think just about Codependence Anonymous, but think about the fact that whenever we have a self, there's a story that we're telling. First, I did this, then I did that, then I moved across the country, and then this happened to me. You're telling a story about yourself, and as you narrate that story, you're leaving a lot out. There's things that you're omitting, there's things that you're including, there's things that you're emphasizing, things you're de-emphasizing, and you tell your story, and a lot of it's shaped by the audience that you're telling it to. But what sociologists like to point out is whatever narrative or story you're telling about yourself is not the whole story. You couldn't tell every single thing about yourself. You couldn't tell every detail. So we are selective, and there's an important relationship between who you are and the story you tell about yourself to others. A large portion of today's lecture is coming from a book called Domination and the Arts of Resistance, Hidden Transcripts by James C Scott. This is one of my favorite books of all time. I shared an office with the history professor named Dean Piper at this college. If you've taken a class with Dean, you know him. And Dean and I both had this book on our bookshelf. This is a very, very important book. It's a great book. I highly recommend it to everyone. Scott points out that power relations shape the presentation of self. He uses a couple of vocabulary words here. He uses the word elite or dominant to refer to the powerful. So anytime you see the word the dominant or the elite, I'm referring to people with power. The other words he uses are the subordinate or subaltern, which is people with less power. So you sort of have the powerful and the powerless, or the haves and the have-nots. Scott's research focused on very, very oppressive systems. He was looking at slavery, serfdom, India's caste system, but what he's saying is, let's think about power and how power shapes how we interact interpersonally, and let's think about what that says about our society. Similar to the argument about the internet, We can learn a lot about our society by examining extreme conditions. So when we looked at the internet, we were looking at a space where you can be extremely anonymous. That's not typical, it's rather extreme, but it gives us a new purchase on space. Similarly, when we look at extremely oppressive systems like slavery, serfdom, and a caste system, it gives us a new way of looking at power relations within our society. Scott wants us to think about discourse in 4 ways. Discourse is basically how we talk to each other. The first way is called the public transcript. We're going to talk about that one. The second one is called infrapolitics. The third one is called the hidden transcript. And the fourth one is called breaking the silence. These are the 4 ways that people with power and people with less power talk to each other. So I'm going to go over each one of these 4, and this sort of organizes the lecture you're about to hear. The first way that elites and the subordinate talk to each other is called the public transcript. Scott argues that it is a self-portrait of the dominant elites as they would have themselves seen. In other words, in a system like slavery, when the powerful and the powerless are in the same room, there is a self-portrait that the dominant elites wanted to create. There's a certain atmosphere they wanted to create, and this is what it is. It's called the public transcript. Within the public transcript, the elite had to give a credible performance of pride, mastery, and superiority. They always had to act strong, like they were in control, and that they knew what was going on. On the other hand, the have-nots, the subordinate, had to give a credible performance of obedience, deference, and sheepishness. In other words, the have-nots had to act in a way that they performed like they were happy to do it. If we were looking at a master and a slave relationship, the master would say, lick my boots, and the slave would have to say, yes, sir, and smile. It is designed to affirm and naturalize the power of the dominant elite, and the public transcript is the official story, or the dominant narrative. It's basically the story that's being told. If you went into the past and you watched a system like slavery, you might mistakenly say that the slaves were happy. But that was because they were in the presence of the powerful, and if they didn't act happy, and they didn't acquiesce to power, and they didn't act deferential, and they didn't act sheepish, they would be beaten. So they performed obedience, deference, and sheepishness. So what type of behaviors would go with this performance? Well, for the subordinates, in a public place, they would smile, they would attentively listen, they would laugh, they would show concern. Well, what about the dominants? How would the dominant elite in the public transcript behave? Well, the powerful always have to act like they know what they're doing. They have to act serious, they have to maintain order, and they can't do anything that makes their group look inept. So let us switch now to the hidden transcript. The hidden transcript are spaces where the subordinates may gather outside the intimidating gaze of power. Another way of thinking about this is offstage. Goffman uses the metaphor of theater for the presentation of self. Well, sometimes the subordinates are on stage, which is defined as the public transcript, where the powerful are, where they have to perform. The hidden transcript is sort of like a backstage, offstage theater, where the subordinates can let their hair down and safely talk to each other and develop counter-narratives. Again, if you think about the public transcript, it's sort of like the official story. Yes, master! Of course, master! I love you, master! But the hidden transcript is where the subordinates gather together and they talk about hate and anger and how they have dreams of killing the master. So this is where a counter-narrative for the subordinates can form. Scott also examines the hidden transcript of the elites. This is where the powerful can gather outside the gaze of the powerless, where they are off stage, and they can actually show that they're not always in control and not always in command of power, and they can admit to each other that sometimes they are weak. So both groups can sort of go to this offstage area, and a different self can be created. Now, there's a very, very, very important aspect that I need everyone to understand. For a long time, historians and sociologists and political scientists only examined the public transcript. They would read stories and hear about slaves or serfs deferring to power and smiling and acting like they cared about their master and they felt like one of the family. And Scott argues that we need to compare and contrast the public transcript and the hidden transcript because they are produced for different audiences and different selves emerge. He argues that we can evaluate the public transcript with the hidden transcript. We can evaluate the hidden transcript with the public transcript. Basically, Scott's saying that we need to evaluate these performances of the elite and the subordinates. Because when you start to realize that people act differently in these different spaces and that power relations matter, you start to question which one is the real self and which one is the fake self, and you start to question about the sort of the authenticity of our performances. Again, this is very important for history, for political science, for sociology. It is very, very common for people to only look at the public transcript and say, oh, that's an accurate portrayal of reality. It's very hard to get at the hidden transcript. How does a person of power gain entrance into a slave quarter? By its very nature, if a person with power, if a white person during slavery went into the slave quarter, suddenly now it was the public transcript because the person with power was there. So what Scott points out is it's very hard for people with power to ever see the hidden transcript. So if a historian or a political scientist or a sociologist ever wanted to get at the hidden transcript, it's extremely difficult because the second someone with power is present, it becomes the public transcript. And he says you have to keep that in mind.